This is code.org. Let's see what we have. Touching the cake. If the enemies get all the way across to the cake, you should place them back on the left side of the screen and decrease the score. To start, you'll write the code for only one of your enemies. Oh, okay. Do this inside the enemy touch cake. By the way, if you don't have all of this, if your game doesn't have controls, blah, 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 go back to the lesson. If you get stuck, check out one of my tutorials. Okay, inside the enemy touch cake function, use a conditional, and hopefully you got it in your head now. Conditional means if, right? It sounds big and complicated. It's not. Use an if to detect whether enemy 1 has touched the cake. If it has, loop the enemy back to the left side. So if the enemy has touched the cake, loop it back to the left side. Set its Y position to be a random number, 150 to 250. Does this sound familiar? Its Y position, the enemy, to 150 to 250. Use the counter pattern to decrease the score by 2. Test your code. One of the ladybugs should now reset when the cake... Okay. So first off, we need enemies touch cake. Keep in mind, enemies touch cake is called or asked to run in the draw loop. Here's my draw loop. Here's enemies. Nope, touch water. Enemies touch cake. When the draw loop runs 30 times a second, the computer hits this and says, oh, what's that? Enemies touch cake. Ooh, smack. And it would run this code. There's nothing here, so it says nothing. Okay. Then it goes back up here and runs the code beneath, which is another function. It would find move player and run that. What we need inside of enemies touch cake is, like we already said, a conditional. And if, we're going to check if what? If enemy 1 has touched the cake. All right. Well, let's take a look at sprites. How could we do touch? Oh, maybe is touching, right? So if the enemy is touching the cake, boom. So now I'm going to ask the computer if enemy 1 is touching cake, right? So if the enemy is touching the cake, the computer will always respond to this either true or false. False would be the enemy is way over here, it's not touching the cake. And then the code inside of our if statement would not happen. The only time this code would run is if the computer responds true. So the if is relying on a Boolean value, a true or false, right? Don't let Boolean scare you, true or false. And if it's true, it runs the code inside. If this is false, the enemy is not touching the cake, it just skips over it, hits the bottom here, and we continue back up running our functions. Okay, so if the enemy is touching the cake, what do they ask us to do? Reset the Y value. Okay, so enemy Y. Boom. And we're going to reset it to what it has been. And then we're also going to need to do the X value. So let me reset the Y to a random number, and they ask for 150 to 250. Again, this should sound familiar. And what am I going to do here? Enemy 1, right? So enemy 1, and take a look. Random number 150 to 250, just like we did before. Then what do they want us to do? They want us to set the enemy, to make it loop to the other side. Now, how do we set the enemy to begin with? How do we make it appear over here? Well, like I said, we're not using this part of it. Right here is where we start. So this code at the top runs once. We set enemy 1's X value to 0 right when the program starts. Then we hit the draw loop, and that stuff runs constantly. So how do I make the enemy start over here? We have already done it once. It's enemy1.x is equal to 0. Now, the only other thing we need is the score. Let's see how we are doing the... Oh, I see a variable here, score. Use the counter pattern to decrease the score by 2. Okay, so let's go back down here, and then I'm going to go to variables. We don't want var. We already have created it, so I just need x equals blank. And I'm going to do score is equal to score minus 2. And again, what that says to the computer, hey, score has a new value. Its new value is whatever that old value was, subtract 2 from it. That's the new value. And the only time this happens is if the enemy is touching the cake. I'm going to get out of their way so we can test if it actually works. Well, I can't hit them anyways. Uh-oh, -2. Cool. Onward.